Welcome into episode 268 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, once again joined by Scott McLaughlin. The Bruins had an impressive 4-1 victory over the Winnipeg Jets at the Garden. And Scott, it's really a microcosm of how much better the Bruins are playing. Obviously, around this time last month, it was kind of the lowest of lows where they fell to Winnipeg. They got completely dominated up in Winnipeg, and here we are now in the back half of January, and the Bruins are just playing so much better. So let's jump into our opening shifts right away.
Yeah, well, I think a big part of this, not really so much a turnaround, but just team growth over the last month has been Charlie Coyle, who was already having a really good season, now increasingly playing like a legitimate number one center. He had a goal and an assist against Winnipeg. He's centering Pastrnak and Marchand. He's up to 17 points in his last 14 games. That line has now played 5 games together. And when they've been on the ice, the Bruins have outscored opponents 5-1. He's on pace for 30 goals and 68 points, which, sure, like that's still not a superstar number one center, but those are really solid number one center numbers. I mean, that's not that I'm comparing him to Bergeron as an all-around player. But I mean, those are the kind of numbers, Bergeron and Krejci would put up on a consistent basis. They're usually in the 60s, like occasionally topping 70, but they were never point per game guys. They were never 90 points. When you have two wingers that good in Pastrnak and Marchand, the center can be sort of the two-way security blanket and doesn't have to be the high point scorer on the line. But Coyle's more than carrying his weight and really stepping up to answer what obviously was this team's biggest question going into the year and even early on in the season.
Yeah, Coyle's been awesome and definitely integral in the Bruins' success this year. And if him and Zacha being number one, number two centers was not at least production-wise, was not a guarantee. And their success was contingent upon, can they elevate their game offensively? And so far, Zacha's probably maybe a little bit behind his pace from last year, maybe around the same. But Coyle definitely is elevated. And had he not, I mean, the Bruins do pride themselves on structure and just a good team game overall. So I don't want to say like if Coyle had 15 points less, they wouldn't be a playoff team. It's just, but they certainly wouldn't be atop the NHL standings, and that's kind of what my opening shift is, which is just, and this might seem obvious to listeners because the Bruins have been atop the standings all year long, but they look different now than they did earlier in the season, and that's a good thing. Like, I remember saying earlier in the season, like, I didn't need the Bruins to be playing their best hockey in October, November, December. You want them playing their best hockey as approaching the playoffs. They've done so the entire time, accumulating points, but they look different now. And I guess it's a long-winded way of me saying the Bruins just really, they're very clearly for real this year. It's not that I didn't think they were a good playoff team, but you just watch how they played against Colorado, playing them twice in short order. Obviously not winning both games, but just playing them hard, playing them tough, getting a win out of one of them. Winnipeg is right at the top of the standings. They've been playing some of the best hockey in the league the last couple of months, not giving up more than 3 goals in a game for a stretch of like 30-something games or whatever it was. So, and yeah, it's just this Bruins team is they are deservedly so among the best that the league has to offer this year, despite not having a high-end number one center.
Yeah, for sure. And the 2 Winnipeg games really mark like a nice sort of bookend of like where they were versus where they are. Because that game, I mean, they're literally exactly a month apart. December 22nd, January 22nd, and that loss in Winnipeg was really one of the low points of the first half. It was their 3rd straight loss. it wound up being 4 straight losses with Minnesota the next night. But it's 5-1 game. It wasn't even close. Like, honestly, almost not even as close as that score indicates. Like, they just were totally overmatched in that game. And that was, not that long after that stretch around Thanksgiving where they had also really struggled, especially against like the Rangers, the Red Wings, a couple bad losses in there. And you're like, yeah, the Bruins are still up there in points, but boy, it really looks like they have a ways to go before they can seriously compete with the top teams in the league. Well, now they are. You mentioned the 2 Colorado games, beating Winnipeg 4-1. Vegas, they played tough. And they're just playing much better hockey. Like, we were all saying it much of the first couple of months. It was like, okay, record's good, but they really are relying on goaltending a lot. The offensive depth wasn't there. They're spending a lot of time in their own zone, giving up odd man rushes. Like, there's clearly a lot to improve on. And you're seeing that now. Like, they've been a positive team in terms of scoring chances. I think it's 5 of their last 6 games. They had a lot of games under 500 earlier in the year in terms of scoring chances. So, and you watch that Winnipeg game, the Jets had 10 shots on goal through 2 periods, 0 high danger chances. Like, Bruins were just in control. They were stringing together shifts in the offensive zone. And, on one hand, like, you could sit there and say, oh, well, they probably didn't get the Jets' best game. And the Jets didn't have Mark Scheifele, which is obviously huge for them. But the Jets had still been playing really good hockey recently. They weren't on a back-to-back or anything, so it's not like they were tired. They did just get Kyle Connor back, so that's a big addition for them. And I thought the Jets played decent. Like, they didn't give the Bruins a ton of great chances either. The Bruins had to work, and they did. And they won, 2 nights after just blowing the doors off the Canadiens and in a very high-scoring, wide-open game. They go out and beat a much better team in a low-scoring, defensive, tight checking game. I'm not going to quite call it a playoff game. I don't think there was really that kind of physical intensity, but more sort of playoff style than a 9-4 game, obviously.
Yeah, and last night against a really good Winnipeg team is something that the Bruins have struggled with, not just this season, but even dating back a little bit towards last year in the playoffs, which is closing out tight games in the third period with the lead. And it's certainly been an issue this year, up until recently. So to have a 2-1 lead in the third period while on the penalty kill in the dying minutes of a game, and to get that insurance marker on the PK from Jake DeBrusk, also included Morgan Geekie. Like, it's a sign of, you have to close out teams when you're ahead in the third period of games. Now, something that we won't be able to see until April is, how does this Boston Bruins team, how does their play translate in the postseason as it does pertain to the war of attrition and physicality? Unfortunately, because of their shortcomings last year, that is going to be something that we have to wait and see. And that's not me being pessimistic. That's not me finding a cop-out like, well, regular season doesn't matter. The regular season does matter. But regular season hockey and postseason hockey are 2 different things. And unfortunately, they have not given themselves the benefit of the doubt because of their recent shortcomings. That said, we can't find that out now anyway. So what they are doing, they can only play the games in front of them, and those are regular season games, and they're playing really well. And something that you're noticing with this team, a big difference between the team now that's accumulating points and the team earlier in the year that was also accumulating points, is that there's just a chemistry factor and a comfortability factor within this lineup, especially up front, that guys were still getting to know each other. One underrated thing about this Bruins team is that is just how much turnover there was between last year's team and this year's team. So many different faces, so many faces gone. It's not just Bergeron and Krejci. It's Foligno. It's Taylor Hall. It's Tom. I
No.
made myself again, Scott. And Tyler Bertuzzi obviously wasn't here too long, but he was here. Garnet Hathaway, same thing. AJ Greer was around. There's just and insert Johnny Beecher, Lauko, Steen's been playing a lot more. Obviously, Poitras, James Van Riemsdyk, Morgan Geekie. I'm probably missing a few others, and then just the elevated roles of Zacha and Coyle. It's just so much gelling had to take place. It can't happen overnight. And right now, Pastrnak, Coyle, and Marchand are phenomenal. Obviously, Pasternak's been amazing all year. Zacha, DeBrusk is resurging, and Van Riemsdyk is playing well. That's great. But you know what's really giving people problems right now, Scott, is the Bruins' third line. The size and puck possession and strong play of Geekie and Frederick is giving the NHL problems, and that is something that is really dangerous going into the eventually going into the playoffs this year.
Yeah, and that third line with Lauko on it as well. By the way, Jacob Lauko now on a 3. He had never even had back-to-back games with points. He now has a 3-game point streak, goals in 2 of the last 3. Like we've talked about, the fourth line trying to find an identity, and now, depending on which line you want to call the third, fourth line, like now there's a little more speed, skill there, where it's Boqvist, Heinen, Poitras. Well, that third line is developing an identity with Geekie, Frederick, Lauko. Like that's becoming, a heavy forechecking, puck possession type line, which we've seen a lot of that from Geekie and Frederick, and now you're seeing a little bit more of it from Lauko, kind of elevating his game in a bigger role with better players. And yeah, they've been great. I mean, they had multiple shifts against Winnipeg where they just hemmed them in and like were relentless, and were getting pucks and bodies to the net. Obviously, it's like I said, scored with Lauko scoring. You mentioned Geekie involved in DeBrusk's shorthanded goal. Frederick, I think Frederick and Geekie both now have 11 points in the last 14 games. I mean, that's tremendous production to be getting from third liners. And you mentioned chemistry and gelling, and that's certainly a big part of it. Another part of it is all those new guys having to learn a new system in so many cases. And we've heard that from guys, Kevin Shattenkirk being a healthy scratch and talking about sitting down with Monty and Jim Montgomery in Columbus, and having to play faster, having to break bad habits that he had picked up in Anaheim. We've heard, Jesper Boqvist recently, when he talked to the media, said, it was a new system. It took him a while to learn it. His time in Providence playing the same system really helped. Morgan Geekie, Matt Poitras, like new systems for them. And, it's a lot of NHL teams play relatively similar systems. Like there aren't huge differences from one to another, but there definitely are some. And in some of those cases, like those were pretty dramatic changes for those guys. In Anaheim, Shattenkirk played on a team that really never had enough possession for defensemen to activate and get involved. Like he had to get back to something he's obviously done before, but not in like the last 3 years. Poitras in juniors said Guelph played more man-to-man defense. He comes here and now it's all zone. Like that is a pretty big adjustment, and you're doing it at the NHL level. So add in the whole adjustment of speed and physicality and all that. Like that there was a lot of growing that this team had to do and learning, and you're definitely starting to see it come to fruition.
Scott, I'm going to name you 3 teams, and there's 2 things that they all share in common. Actually, you know what? There might be 3 things. Nope, 2. Okay. Vancouver, Colorado, and Dallas. There's 2 things they all share in common off the top of my head. Can you give me at least one of them? Vancouver, Colorado, and Dallas.
I would say they all have an excellent number one defenseman.
Okay, all right. There's definitely more they have in common than I'm giving them credit for. Yeah. Want me to just spoil it for you?
Sure.
All right. Not only are they all Western Conference teams, they're the only teams in the National Hockey League with more goals for this year than the Boston Bruins. So the reason I bring up the conference part is that means there's no Eastern Conference team that has more goals for this year than the Boston Bruins. And potentially fact check me on that, Scott, but just looking up and down the standings, I believe that to be true. Here we are in January, almost February. No Patrice Bergeron, no David Krejci, none of the aforementioned players that they had last year on offense that I mentioned. And they are the highest scoring team in the Eastern Conference right now as we approach February. I mean, that is absolutely incredible. And that is indicative of Don Sweeney, who I have been hard on in the past at times. I've also applauded him in the past. I'm not a Don Sweeney hater and I'm not a Don Sweeney lover. I think he's been in general a good GM for the Bruins, but he did a really, really good job this year identifying players for cheap. We've talked about that in the past, and combine that with just the players themselves stepping up and playing a team game. That is, again, we're approaching February. That's no accident.
Yeah, on a per game basis, the Maple Leafs are 0.01 goals per game ahead of the Bruins. But that's it in the East. It's Canucks 3.79, Avs 3.77, Stars 3.63, Oilers 3.5, Leafs 3.49, and then Bruins 3.48.
And the Bruins' defensive game is far better than Toronto, so it's just like,
and goaltending,
yeah, just everything.
But since Christmas, to kind of circle us back around to like how much the Bruins have improved since that break, and using that to reset, Bruins are the number one offense in the NHL since then. So you're now talking almost a full month that they've been the best offensive team in the league, averaging over 4 goals per game. You mentioned that streak that Winnipeg had. They had gone 34 straight games without giving up more than 3 goals, and the Bruins break that. Now, the fourth goal's an empty netter, but nonetheless, like, you just did something against statistically the best defensive team in the NHL that no one else had. And, and the Bruins did a lot of that damage at 5-on-5, which is Winnipeg's biggest strength. They've been an excellent 5-on-5 team this year. Their special teams are actually like shockingly disappointing. They're kind of like definitely bottom half, and maybe even like bottom third of the league in both power play and penalty kill. And the Bruins are the better 5-on-5 team against them, especially for the first 2 periods. Winnipeg made a push in the third, which you have to expect. Again, they're a really good team themselves. They're not going to go quietly, but that, also says a lot about the Bruins to kind of take that punch, absorb it, and then counterpunch, hit back, and extend the lead and close out the win.
Yeah, and Scott, again, and we've talked about it in the past, but like the lack of an elite number one center has always made us feel like, yeah, they might have trouble scoring because people are going to be asked to do too much, maybe potentially. But I mean, if you look at the Bruins roster right now, especially if you keep it to like, their forwards that are more or less going to play a full season, like the Bruins' third and fourth line right now, like Trent Frederick, Morgan Geekie, those guys are already in the mid-20s in points. Geekie with 23 points. Danton Heinen is in a fourth line role right now, 17 points in 38 games. Matthew Poitras, 15 points in 32 games, like just beneath half a point per game pace, and he's in a fourth line role. Boquist hasn't played enough games to give a fair assessment. I guess what I'm trying to say is, yeah, this team might lack a true elite scoring number one center, which you've discussed already on this episode. Bergeron and Krejci never were those things offensively, but they also have that elite guy in Pastrnak on the wing. You're looking at a Bruins team that, like, up and down their forward lines, like, they're all gonna, like, their lowest scoring forward this year could end up in like the high 30s in points. Boquist, no, because he's going to have to, like, I'm just trying to say the guys that have a full, close to a full season of games or a reasonable amount, they're all going to finish in 30 plus points in scoring this year.
Yeah, or at least, like at least mid-20s, and that's
besides Loco.
Right, and I was just going to say, like, think about what we were talking about the fourth line not all that long ago, where it was Lauko, Beatrice, Steen, and I think at one point, like with a couple games left in December, they had gone the entire month with 1 point between them. And it's like now all of a sudden you just look so much deeper, and it does feel like any of their four lines can score, any of their four lines can kind of swing momentum on a shift, get some ozone time at least, create chances. And I thought a fairly important development last night was, and part of it was maybe out of necessity, but Montgomery would continue to roll all four lines in the third period in a 1-goal game, which we've seen him not do. We've seen him shorten the bench. And I asked him about that after the game, and he said, first thing he said was, well, everyone was playing well, so he really had no reason to shorten the bench. And then the second thing is he did say, like, we're in a busy stretch of the schedule. He knows they have a back-to-back coming up Wednesday and Thursday, so that factors in it too. But the first thing, the main part of that was everyone was playing well. And then I had wondered at one point if Poitras was going to have to ride the pine again, because, and Brick highlighted on the Nesson broadcast, he had, I thought a pretty tough turnover in the D zone. He kind of held, wasn't originally under pressure, ended up under pressure and flipped a backhand off the glass that was kept in the zone. And I asked Montgomery about that on Tuesday after practice. And he said, like, he actually didn't really have a huge problem with that. He said that the support on the play wasn't great, and he tried to make the right play, just getting it off the glass and out of the zone, which is, better than trying to, all right, I'm going to throw this pass across the high slot or something, and you risk getting it picked off. Obviously, it didn't work out, but I thought that was, it was nice to see him stick with Poitras and, like, not bench him, stick with all four lines. And it ended up being Poitras' D-zone work that poked the puck out into the neutral zone, where Lauko ends up drawing a penalty that sends the Bruins to a late power play, which then they end up taking a penalty of their own. Jets get an abbreviated power play, but then DeBrusk scores shorthanded, so all works out in the end.
Yeah, and look, the game happens so fast, especially at the pro level. I've never really been a fan of a coach benching a player based off of a turnover, because it happens to everybody. I mean, it happened to Marchand on Winnipeg's first goal. Now, you could sit there and say it was miscommunication with Coyle, and maybe Coyle should have been there. But it happens. I think when a player needs to sit down is if it's repetitive, if they're just kind of not getting it. So yeah, I was glad to see that. Now, coming up next for the Bruins are the Hurricanes, Scott, and Carolina has historically in recent years proven to be a really difficult matchup for the Bruins. And in my opinion, it's because they make it tough to get to inside ice. They have big defensemen. They got good size in the back end, long sticks. They just make it tough to get inside. And getting to inside ice is what the Bruins needed to improve upon this year, in my opinion. This is a good test to see if having a more improved developing Trent Frederick and adding a Morgan Geekie and Charlie Coyle, like, let's see these James Van Riemsdyk, these forwards that have length and size. Let's see if they can have better luck getting to the net against Carolina, which is, again, they play that style of hockey that isn't always the funnest to watch, but it's playoff style hockey.
Yeah, and even, I think internal improvement from guys like Coyle attacking more this year, to Brusk now going to the net much more than he was earlier in the season. And Carolina's a team that's playing a lot better now. They got off to a slow start, to the point where you're like, are the Hurricanes going to be in danger of missing the playoffs? Like, they were way down there in the standings early on, Well, they're 8-2-1 in their last 11. They're firmly entrenched in a playoff spot. Them and Philly kind of battling for second and even pushing the Rangers for first in that Metropolitan Division. Their goaltending was awful early in the season, and they've sort of settled a little bit there with Pyotr Kochetkov playing better for them. So, yeah, it is a great test. Another great test. Winnipeg we've talked about Colorado, Vegas. Like, this is a tough stretch of the schedule for the Bruins. And, then right before the All-Star break, you're at Philly. That's a team that is a lot better this season and looks I won't go too far into all the analytics, but by all measures, it looks like a pretty legit team. Like, it's not fluky what the Flyers are doing this year. And even in between, you're in Ottawa, which should be a gimme. That's not a very good team, but it's the second night of a back-to-back with travel, so that's going to be a challenge too. It's if the Bruins get into this All-Star break with, say winning 2 out of 3 of these, like that's going to be a hell of a way to go in. But obviously they've got to do it first. This is a good test for them.
And looking at the current standings, Scott, it's interesting to note that should the season end tomorrow or today, you would have 5 Atlantic Division teams in the playoffs, which I think would be the first time that's been the case since this realignment. I believe the Metro has offered 5 teams once before in the playoffs.
I think this was pretty early on in the restructure, but when the Bruins played the Senators in the first round, I think the Atlantic only had 3 that year. I think that they were the 2 and 3, and both wild cards were from the Metro.
Right. So this may be the first time, if things hold up,
that the
Atlantic. Right, but what you're saying is that was the Metro that had 5 teams. This would be the Atlantic having 5 teams for the first time. Correct?
I thought, is that so? Is that where we are at this point?
Yeah, right now.
Yeah, we might have just confused each other, but yeah. So yeah, right now it's 5 Atlantic. Yeah.
Right, which I think would be the first time that's happened, if that were to happen. What you
like by points percentage, I guess technically like Capitals and Devils are
nah.
just ahead of Tampa, but like they're all right there. They're all
we don't
within a point of each other, 2 points. Yeah,
we look at the hard points. I don't care if some teams has like 8 games in hand. But yeah, I mean, I guess the reason I think about that is because I look at the standings, and this would be a really good crop of teams in the Eastern Conference to have in the playoffs. Like it's good for the NHL when the Flyers are in the playoffs. It's good for the NHL when the Red Wings are in the playoffs. Obviously, the Rangers are there, the Bruins and Toronto. Couple of teams that, I mean, the Devils, everybody expected to be there. The Islanders, we'll see what Patty Waugh can do. Pittsburgh, they're in trouble. But anyway, just kind of a random thought looking at the standings.
Should be, man, they really should be better than their record, but
they absolutely should be.
They can't seem to get out of it. So who knows? It's such a crowded field that there's going to be a lot of teams there beating up on each other over the second half of the season for sure. And by the way, that means a lot of desperate opponents playing the Bruins. Like there aren't going to be a whole lot of games against teams that are either firmly in it or firmly out of it. There's going to be a lot of games against teams right on the bubble.
Yeah, combine that with the fact that Bruins have learned from last year. And again, it's not as though the Bruins last year were playing out the string in the regular season, like not trying to win, not trying to keep good habits. What I was afraid of last year, and I think it came to fruition, was that it just happens subconsciously. It just does. You don't have that desperation when you're 50 points ahead of everybody else. And you can't even manufacture it, even though the lip service was there. I don't think that's the case this year with the Bruins. Like they combine that with like they don't want that to happen again, but also like their opponents are gonna force them to play desperate. I think every night, which is good.
Yeah, and it's like it sounds weird, but it's almost a silver lining of not being as talented. And again, like they've been high scoring recently, but they have to work more for their wins this year, and not just because of their opponents, but because they're not talented enough to take 2 periods off and then just turn it on the third and come away with a 4-2 win. Like that, they're not. If they're winning 4-2, it's because they probably played at least 2.5 really solid periods, and that's good. Like that builds the habits you need for the playoffs. Now, of course, you can still be not talented enough to win in the end, but to your point, in terms of just like the way they have to work for wins, they're definitely testing themselves more this year.
What did Herb Brooks tell his boys? Gentlemen, you don't have enough talent to win on talent alone. Or maybe that was just a Kurt Russell ad lib. I don't know if that actually was said in real life, but according to the movie, it did. But listen, like will does beat skill. Honestly, if skill doesn't have the will to match up, like absolutely it can. We saw it last year. Last year's Bruins team was far superior on paper than certainly Florida, and I would beg any other team that was in that postseason, maybe except for like Colorado if they were clicking. And they were out in the first round. And the end of last season in the regular season felt very similar to the beginning of this season, where the Bruins were winning and they were gaining 2 points every night. But I didn't love the way the Bruins were playing heading into the playoffs last year. And I didn't love the way the Bruins were playing in the beginning of this year either. But they were still collecting points. But right now, it's not the case. Right now, I love the way they're playing, and I think most people do. So,
yeah, for sure. Circling a little bit back to the fourth line, because this seems to be I guess I'm not surprised because it's Poitras, and everything around Poitras has been a talking point this year. But do you have any problem with moving him to the wing? And what did you think of his first game there?
Yeah, I thought he was fine. And obviously there was the turnover that you talked about earlier. But with a young player, I playing center in the National Hockey League is very difficult. And I don't think that putting somebody on the wing is a bad thing, because it helps you acclimate just a little bit more without the spotlight on you. And I still think, like, okay, so you're not playing center, but you're still in the middle. You're still between the boards of an NHL game. So it's better than not playing at all. I mean, Patrice Bergeron played wing for a lot of his rookie year with Michael Nylander and Sergei Samsonov. It happens. It happens. I don't have an issue with it.
No, me neither. And, I think one of the things that, maybe the Bruins just misspoke or might have not even known, but early in the year, there seemed to be a couple times where, whether it's Sweeney or Montgomery kind of hinted at, like, well, Poitras pretty much only played center, so they didn't really think wing was an option. Poitras said he's actually played quite a bit of wing in the past, and Montgomery today on Tuesday after practice said that he had played more wing even last season than he initially realized. So, again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I watched a whole lot of Guelph games last year. So I can't tell you how many he split, center versus wing. But it does seem like there's at least some experience there, which there had previously been a narrative that, like, he had only ever played center. So, he said he's pretty comfortable there. And obviously, to your point, like, it definitely eases some of the pressure and responsibilities. You're not now. Look, if you're the first forward back, you still have to play defense like a center. But in general, you're not as low in the defensive zone. You're not doing as much skating, covering as much area. In the Bruins zone defense, like, the center is sort of the cleanup in everyone else's zone. Like, you're the constant support moving all over. If you're a wing, you have your one area, and, like, that's kind of all you're responsible for. So it should take some pressure off him, and that's not a bad thing at all for a 19-year-old kid going through kind of the dog days of an NHL season right now.
Right. I mean, most 19-year-olds are in their second semester of college right now, just starting. So, and what's wrong with versatility, right? I mean, Pavel Zacha has played wing and center this year. Charlie Coyle has played wing and center in his career. Trent Frederick, Morgan Geekie, Jesper Boquist, like Poitras, like if you have a natural center, there's nothing wrong with, making sure that they can play the wing as well, because sometimes the situation calls for it. Maybe you like his chemistry with somebody else, and that somebody else happens to be better fit as a center. Like, it's never a bad thing to be as versatile as possible. So all good for me. Any final thoughts, Scott? I know it's been maybe a quick episode, but we've kind of covered most bases so far.
Yeah, I don't think so. One thing that we haven't really talked about, and it wasn't a huge part of Monday's game either, but the Bruins over the last month are 35% on the power play, number 2 in the NHL, and that it almost feels a little surprising because I feel like they still have some pretty sloppy power plays, but you watch games around the NHL and it's like every team does. No one, even the teams that are near the top on the power play, none of them are really as well-oiled of a machine as you might think from afar. They all turn it over on injuries. It just happens. But yeah, I was kind of looking at that, and I was like, it feels like we don't usually spend a ton of time on the power play, and maybe part of that is that the Bruins still don't draw a ton of penalties. That's still not a strength of theirs, but that was another area that kind of started the year a little bit slow and has now been clicking really well for a month.
Do you prefer Coyle in the bumper or Zacha on that top unit? Because it looks like in practice today, from what you tweeted out, they put Zacha back there, and with JVR in that front and Coyle in the bumper, I kind of like that size through screens and stuff.
Yeah, because that top unit, it really feels like it's at its most dangerous when it's running through JVR. Yes, both the true net front role, but also when he gets that puck on that right doorstep, you just feel like he can make something happen, whether it's taking to the net himself or making the right pass. He's in a dangerous spot, and he knows how to make something happen from there. And I like Coyle in the bumper because it's a right shot, so that's the one-time option for Van Riemsdyk to just pop that right back out to someone. But obviously Zacha's played there as well, so I think they're still going to tweak from game, even against Winnipeg. I think Coyle started the game with the first unit, and then they end up switching to Zacha. So you can mix and match, and it might even depend on something like who does the other team have out there defending, or how do they defend? Is one passing lane into the bumper going to be more open than another? All those things. So I think it's fine either way, but I probably have a slight preference for Coyle there.
Yeah, I think right now I do too. And also he deserves it. He's not that points are everything, but he's the third leading scorer on the team, and a significant amount of points more than Zacha. I think maybe around 10 or so. So, he also deserves it on paper right now too. I think he's besides Marchand and Pastrnak, I know it's easy to say this based on the listing, but he has been their third best forward this year.
Yeah, for sure. It's really impressive to watch because, I was thinking of this too, and I asked Montgomery about it, and he didn't really give me much of an answer, but thinking of it from Coyle's perspective of a guy who earlier in his career did get quite a bit of top 6 time in Minnesota, especially on the wing at times, but even as a number 2 center there. But his whole time in Boston, he's been the number 3 center. And I was for a guy now over 30, I feel like it would be easy. A lot of players might kind of just accept I'm a third line center. And once that you sort of mentally put yourself there, it can almost block you from being more than that. If you're not still aspiring to that. And Coyle obviously has put in the work and absolutely not at all limited himself. And it's easy to say, yeah, someday I want that opportunity. But when you have Bergeron and Krejci in front of you, realistically, you're the number 3 center, and he's continued to work towards that, and now has really taken advantage of this opportunity, which is one that he didn't take advantage of. We've talked about 2 years ago when Krejci was abroad. He got that chance to start the year there and didn't stick.
Exactly. Yeah. And you nailed it right there. That was his opportunity. And I'm sure that when Krejci came back, he was probably like, "Oh, that may have been it for me." He probably knew maybe one of those guys, if not both, would retire before he was no longer a Bruin himself. But I'm sure that ate at him. Like he had a golden opportunity alongside Taylor Hall and who was it? Was it Hall and Pasternak that year? Bergeron, DeBrusk, and Marchand.
I'm trying to remember. No, I think DeBrusk was lower in the lineup. It was Craig Smith there at.
Oh, there you go. Maybe it was. Yeah, something.
I think he might have started on line with Hall and Smith.
Okay. Yeah.
And then things pretty quickly got changed.
Yeah. But yeah, he's been great. So great, in fact, that I just don't think, even if there was an opportunity to be had to bring in a number one center, it's well, he is a number one center, as we've talked about, but an outside number one center for a good hockey deal. It's I don't even, if I'm the Bruins, I'm just looking to add a solid, middle six, top six forward anywhere you can, preferably on the wing. And just roll with what you have. This team is clearly good. I do think they need another, really solid middle six forward that can score. Maybe that person, plays on the third line with Frederick and Geeky. Maybe they find their way in the top six role, but Coyle's played so well that I think their priorities have changed. There's no need to sell the farm this year at the deadline. Don't go crazy. Just roll with what you have and add where you can.
Yeah, I know. Everyone's like Elias Lindholm, and they're different situations. I'll give you that. Coyle has more talent around him, but it's Elias Lindholm 30 points in 46 games this year. Charlie Coyle 38 points in 46 games. Again, now if you want to say maybe Lindholm's an upgrade over Zacha or bumps Zacha to the wing or whatever, it still makes your team stronger overall, but in terms of, the idea that, if you think the Bruins need to add a legitimate number one center still, maybe you still have questions about whether Coyle can keep this up, you've got to be shooting higher than Elias Lindholm then, because he's not a clear upgrade over Charlie Coyle right now. So, it's great. It's, huge credit to Charlie Coyle.
Yeah, been very fun to watch, very impressive, and obviously he seems like a, great person off the ice too, and treats the media well from what you see. Just seems like a really, really, really good person. So happy for him on the pod here. So, any final takeaways, Scott?
No, not really, not from me.
Lauko likes grapes.
What's that?
Lauko
does like grapes. If you go to the Bruins Twitter, you can hear my hard-hitting question to Jacob Lauko about grapes. We've barely touched on the defense, but I guess worth noting, Parker Wotherspoon goes in for Kevin Shattenkirk on Monday, and I think you're probably just going to see some rotation in that spot for a while. None of those guys are going to sit too long. Wotherspoon certainly doesn't deserve to sit for 5 games straight. Shattenkirk's not going to either. I would venture to guess that Forbort probably draws out for one of these two with the back-to-back, whether that's Wednesday or Thursday night, having just returned from an injury. But, you're going to see guys in and out. And, again, I think Grzelcyk's been playing better recently, but, it wouldn't shock me if he's the one who rotates out at some point either. So they have 7 defensemen they like, and really probably even 8 with Mason Lohrei down in Providence. So
definitely 8 with him down in Providence.
Yeah. So some guys are going to be in and out for a while.
Yeah. And the combination of many things, right? Injury, Shattenkirk being a veteran that, wouldn't hurt to have a couple of nights off here and there. Forbort's rusty. Wotherspoon's still earning his stripes. Grzelcyk still working his way back to form. Lohrei being down. Like, there's so many reasons why you'll just naturally see. I'd be surprised if you go more than 2 games seeing the same 60 on the ice, the Bruins the rest of the way. Personally,
yeah, and we didn't touch on our last episode because we had actually recorded before this game happened, but the first game, Beecher and Lohrei went down to Providence. They both score in a 2-1 win. Beecher scores in regulation. Lohrei scores the overtime winners. So, talk about seeing 2 guys respond the way you would hope and not, getting down on themselves and going down there and taking, 5 games to kind of get things going.
Exactly. No, yeah, that's exactly how you want to see them respond. And yeah, I mean, Lohrei just seemed like he was a player who should be the league ahead of where he is on that overtime goal. As for Beecher, I mean, he's going to have to work his way back into the lineup. I'm sure, again, injuries happen, so there'll probably be a natural call up for him at some point. But yeah, I mean, I think Montgomery likes the fourth line the quote unquote fourth line that the Bruins are icing right now, and I do too. I think it's a good look. So this Bruins lineup right now offers. Again, they don't have that elite number 1 center that produces at an elite level, but they have 4 lines that can score anytime they're on the ice. And to your point, Scott, we couldn't say that weeks ago when their fourth line was Beecher, Loco, and Steen. It was offensively anemic, and so right now everything's going in a great direction for the Bruins. So
yeah.
All right, so I think that probably wraps up this episode. We'll be back with a Friday episode.
Bridget will be back. Yep.
Beanpot tonight.
Yeah, we're recording before the women's Beanpot final, but I'm confident saying congrats to Bridget on a great call of the game. Congrats to BU on winning the Beanpot. And if for some reason either of those things aren't true, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, exactly. We'll scrub this we'll scrub the second part of that, regardless. But yeah, so that's great. So then we have, so the Bruins and the Hurricanes are on Wednesday. Do they play Thursday, Scott? No?
Yeah, Thursday at Ottawa.
Okay, so we'll have 2 games to react to on Friday. And then I think there's a Saturday matinee game, but so we'll be able to react to Carolina and Ottawa before our next during our next recording. So, all right. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you very soon. Hey, guys. Thanks for watching this Skate podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.